Hey, friends, welcome back to another episode of Space for Life. This is going to be so much fun today. I've been looking forward to this episode for a great while, uh, just selfishly. I have connected with our new guest, AJ Swoboda, and I'm so excited to have him on. He is an author, written 10 plus books. I'll give you a little bit more of a background, but I came across his work through a common kind of writing platform and reading platform that we both are part of, Substack. And I'd heard his name, but didn't know a lot about actually what he wrote about. And so I connected, and he wrote a post a few months ago on honoring. And I just found myself so engaged with it because it was such a different perspective on honoring, which is really not talked about all that much.
Mhm,
And he
mhm,
talked about how honoring is something that we can do not only for people that we get along with and agree with and that are easy to honor, but how we can honor people that are different from us,
mhm,
that we're having a hard time with, that things aren't going well with, and how even God honors
mhm,
people just in the very gift of free will to
mhm,
allow people to go their direction. So that immediately got my wheels turning, and I went, man, I want to hear more about it. And then as I dug in, one of the things, AJ, I just love is your book titles. They are
Ah.
they are incredible. And I just
Um,
immediately I read them, I just go, I gotta read this book. So let me throw out a few for those who are not familiar with your work. Um, and you'll get a sense of, I think, what AJ is about. Messy, God loves it. God likes it that way. The Dusty Ones, Why Wandering Deepens Your Faith. Um, a Glorious Dark, Finding Hope in the Tension Between Belief and Experience. Certainly one that's up my alley. Subversive Sabbath, The
mhm,
Surprising Power of Rest in a Nonstop World. And one I've also downloaded, The Gift of Thorns. Love that title. Jesus, the Flesh, and the War for Our Wants. So great book titles. And we're going to be diving in particularly to a brand new book of AJ's that releases next week. Called A Teachable Spirit, The Virtue of Learning from Strangers, Enemies, and Absolutely Anyone. That is a great title. And I was telling AJ just before we started recording that that just absolutely engages me
mhm,
because my short version of my life mission statement is listen, learn, teach, learn, listen. And I
mhm,
think
mhm,
that connection between being a, a voracious learner and a quality teacher is too
mhm.
often
So,
overlooked. So
yeah.
I can't wait to talk more about that. Um, AJ, welcome to Space for Life.
Thank you, Tommy. What an honor to be with you, and thanks for all the people that are with you or listening. It's nice to meet your audience and your people.
Yeah, we have a great audience. I love just connecting with people, and it's really fun because at least my sense is that it's a really diverse audience of people who are just they are interested in learning, they're interested in growing, they're interested in the fullness of life, and
Mhm,
I love that. And I think that's what Space for Life is about. And kind of, I think we all resonate who listen to this that we find life as we create space and live intentionally. So
absolutely. Yep.
a lot of what we're about. So AJ is an associate professor of Bible and theology at Bushnell University and lead mentor for the Doctor of Ministry program on spiritual formation and soul care at Friends University. So spiritual formation and soul care. I sure wish I had that when I went to seminary
Mhm,
about 40 years ago. um, told you about a few of his books. He is also the host of Slow Theology. Uh, that's just absolutely, I love it. Podcast with Dr. Nijay Gupta. Did I pronounce
Okay.
that right?
That's right. You got it.
Yeah, and writes the widely read Low Level Theologian Substack. So, AJ, before I ask you to kind of get in and tell us a little bit about your story, I'd love to just hear the background story behind your Substack, Low Level Theologian and Slow Theology. Where did those names come from? How did
Mm.
you get started with that?
Yeah, slow theology is a labor of love with a New Testament scholar, Nijay Gupta. He's a leading New Testament scholar, teaches at Northern Seminary. He's a very close friend. We've known each other for years. Slow Theology as a podcast was birthed about 5 years ago after the publication of one of my books called After Doubt, How to Question Your Faith Without Losing It, which was basically my attempt at helping bring some help to those walking through doubt and the experience called deconstruction. So slow theology is kind of the fullness of the kind of full iteration of that. But low level theologian actually comes from a pretty interesting story that I tell in the book A Teachable Spirit. I had a gentleman. I was teaching at a seminary in Chicago, and this quiet kind of this real quiet kind of introverted Hispanic pastor comes up to me after one of my lectures, and he says to me that he felt like God wanted him to tell me something, and I wanted, what? Well, tell me. I'm all, who wouldn't want to know? And he said that he felt like the Lord wanted me to know that I was, in his words, quote unquote, a low level theologian. And when he said that to me, of course, all of my ego was inflamed with rage. My pride was popped, and I kind of thought, like, who is this guy? Who does he think he is, telling me I'm a low level theologian? I got a PhD in theology. I've done my hard work. Who is this guy? And I went back to my hotel that night, uh, and really kind of was angry. I mean, I was thinking, like, what am I gonna, I wanted to tell him, you're a low level student.
Yeah.
I was pretty upset, and the better part of my brain got the mic, and I didn't say anything, and just sort of sat in it. And about 2 weeks later, I was in a time of prayer and reflection, just sort of introspection, and it dawned on me in prayer that is exactly what I am. I am a low level theologian. God has called me to be a theologian who serves the local church. And there are some theologians that are called to serve the academy, some that are called to serve fellow academics, some are called to serve, high level ivory tower stuff, but not me. I'm called to serve people on the ground. And I actually use that story to introduce the chapter in the book on how to learn from children, because it was an offense to be considered a lowly person, when in reality, isn't lowliness one of the virtues in the kingdom of God? To be
Yeah.
a lowly, humble person who, so the low level theologian stuck with me so much that I decided to make it the name of my Substack as a constant reminder of my calling before the Lord to serve people on the ground.
I love that.
Yep.
As I read the titles of your book and the new one, to me, the common theme throughout them all is they're all underneath it are basically about humility and
Mm,
different plays on that.
wow,
And then as
that's insightful. Yeah, that's insightful.
yeah, it jumps off the page to me. And then as I read the honoring and some of your other posts and started into things, I thought about low level theologian. Now, I wasn't really quite sure what that meant, other than it meant um, something with a little bit of a humble taste to it. But I thought what really strikes me is it's accessible
Mm,
theologian.
mm, huh,
And I think that is incredibly helpful, but and particularly when I think about a podcast like what I'm doing, um, you know, throw in theologian, that you're a theologian with a PhD and teaching in seminary, and it can quickly be very intimidating.
Yeah,
And at the same time, lead people think, well, what is there going to be in this for me? And
yeah,
yet,
that's it.
what you do is I think you bring theology just regularly in the complete way you communicate, you bring it to life
Yeah.
into our
Yeah.
lives very personally. And I have already just really appreciated that.
Tommy, that's a really kind thing. It really insightful thing to say that word humility. That I definitely is a theme that that has stuck with me over all these years. Although to be very clear, there are forms of humility that are not good. You know, false humility of um, especially when it comes to a teachable spirit, a form of humility that would say, you know, you should be a humble Christian, a humble person who doesn't have any convictions and just listen to what everybody has to say and become the culture around you. That's not the kind of humility I'm interested in. I'm really interested in Christians in people who have a deep sense of commitment to their true identity. They know who they are. Um, and yet, despite having a deep identity, still having the capacity to learn from anybody who comes around them. You know, we're recording this on Monday, which is obviously after Easter Sunday. And I was at church yesterday. My pastor, great guy, pastor, uh, did a sermon on the Emmaus Road story with the disciples.
Hmm.
And there's this funny moment in the Emmaus Road story where the disciples do not know who this man is. They don't know it's Jesus. And they say to him, he's resurrected. They don't know who he is. And they say to him, have you not heard what's been going on in Jerusalem? Of course, Jesus had known because he was the one being crucified. But they ask him, you know, did you not know what was going on? And Jesus says, tell me what happened. And he lets them tell him what happened to him. And in this story, he's almost playing dumb, Tommy. It's really funny. Like Jesus is almost playing dumb because he wants to hear what they have to say. He's listening. And Jesus knows everything, right? Isn't it interesting that the person who knows everything still is willing to listen
Oh, and constantly ask questions.
and asking questions
Yeah.
that shows that he knows what they're really looking for. I mean, Jesus tells 38 parables in the New Testament, and all of them are parables, stories, accounts of that about farmers and fishermen and coins and that reveal that Jesus was a learner of the culture around him. He understood the world that he was in. We're told in Hebrews that Jesus learned obedience.
Yeah.
How can you say that the God of the universe was learned the way of obedience? In Luke's gospel, when Luke says that Jesus grew in favor and stature with God and with people, how can Jesus grow in wisdom? Favor, wisdom, and what a fascinating concept to consider that that as a true human, Jesus embodied a life of learning. I mean,
Yeah.
that is just astounding to think about, Tommy.
Yeah.
Astounding.
I couldn't agree more. And I think about this very often. The about humility. The two people described as humble in the Bible, Moses, probably one of the most powerful presences in the whole Old Testament, and then Jesus describes himself as humble.
Are
In
those the only two?
I think those are the only two that I know that
Wow.
are described, as humble. And when I think about that, I go, that right there tells me that that humility is so far, so much bigger than anything that I think
Mm-hmm.
about. And I even think about low-level theologian, isn't that exactly what John the Baptist embraced?
Mm.
He
I
must
must decrease. I
decrease.
must increase. Yeah.
Yeah. So, anyway, I love it. I just go for it. That is,
Thanks, Tommy. That's
we
great.
just need a lot more of that. So, um, I'd love to just, I really don't know anything about your kind of backstory, that
Hmm.
what's led you to this place in your life. I'd love for you to just share a little bit about that.
Yeah, I grew up here. I'm out here in Oregon. I live in Eugene, Oregon now, but was not raised in the Christian tradition. Had a pretty radical turn to Christianity when I was 16 in high school, and was a college pastor for years. Eventually planted a church in Portland with a great team of people. But now I'm a full-time academic. So I teach Bible and theology at Bushnell University. Great school out west here. It's actually the oldest, goes back to statehood. I think it's the oldest Christian university on the West Coast, or at least pretty darn close.
Uh,
I teach Bible and theology here. I do writing. I'm very involved in my church. But one of the things that I feel really called to do is help Christians deeply engage in the life of theology. That is to say, helping the church, God's people, become theologically deep people, how to think well. And so this book, A Teachable Spirit, really is connected to that on a real level. More than any book I've ever written, this book is more grounded in my experience in the classroom of watching students come to university, in many instances having come to the university with a lot of malformed or ill-formed ideas about God or the Bible or whatnot, and coming and realizing that a lot of the stuff that they were taught as kids, a lot of it needs some work, some correction. And that's a scary experience to go to university, to, go to the big university and realize I've got some learning to do. And for too many, learning is almost seen as, and being teachable is almost seen as like a slippery slope. That's really dangerous. It's gonna lead to you. Let me read this to you. You'll actually get a kick out of this. This is from a pamphlet from a university that a university in 1643. So that should tell you a little bit about when this might be. But this is from a university pamphlet published by the university, major university. I'll read it to you. Let every student be plainly instructed and earnestly pressed to consider the main end of his life and studies, which is to know God and Jesus Christ, which is eternal, and to lay Christ in the bottom as the only foundation of all sound knowledge and learning. Now you hear that and you go like, that sounds like Wheaton University or Gordon Conwell or some Bible college. What was it? It was Harvard University, 1643. And this is, one of the most important, influential universities in the world that was started as a Bible college. It was started as a Christian university to train ministers.
yeah,
And we hear that, and we all of a sudden get really afraid that, well, if that's what learning is going to do to you, we're just a couple years away from, rejecting our faith. Because I wouldn't say today Harvard is the place you go to learn how to be obedient to Jesus Christ.
right.
Um, so the point is, in my experience, I think a lot of Christians are afraid of learning. They're afraid of the journey of learning. They're afraid of being taught. They're afraid of who teaches them. How do you know what to believe, what not to believe? These are really important questions. So this book is really birthed out of that experience. You asked me about my life experience of being a teacher in the classroom. It is my attempt at helping Christians and people of faith consider what the learning process should look like, and cautions along the way. What do we need to know? Like, how do we learn from experts? How do we learn from children, from culture, from enemies? I have a whole chapter on how to learn from enemies. And you go
Right.
like, could you learn anything from an enemy? Yes, you can learn from your enemies. In fact, it's one of the most sacred things a person could do. So it's birthed out of that experience of being in the classroom.
Yeah, I can relate to that just on so many fronts. Uh, many decades ago, went to seminary, and I went to a mainline Presbyterian seminary. And being more evangelical in my faith, I went with significant guards up,
Yeah, right.
uh, wary and suspicious of what I was being taught. Some of that appropriately, some of that with uh, a proper discernment,
Hmm.
but probably to such an extreme that it caused me to miss out on some things that I could have uh, really learned from. And so, that teachable spirit, I can't wait to read the book. That teachable spirit has two sides to it,
Hmm.
and it's a risky endeavor to
Mm.
be open
Yep.
and to truly be open-minded, and yet the alternative is so uh, life draining,
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
also.
Yeah. Can I tell a story about that? I mean, the you mentioned the fear of being teachable, the fear of I think a lot of that fear, Tommy, comes from our lived experience of being in a politicized, ideologically entrenched world where you've got these two parties that are lobbing, ideological bombs at each other all the time. And and it teaches us that to be humble is actually a weakness. It's a liability
Right.
almost. I was watching, this was just a couple of years ago. I was watching the news, which I'm increasingly telling people to stop doing because it's just depressing us all. But I was watching the news, and there was a story of a woman who had, very young woman, just out of college, kind of new in her professional career, and she had gotten in trouble um, with, she had gotten kind of caught up in this political nefarious activity, and she got caught for it. And nothing, nobody was harmed. It was not physical, anything like that. But it was, she got caught for doing some stuff politically that you're not allowed to do. And the video that I was watching on the news program that day was her giving her statement, her sworn statement to the court. And she was in, probably 25, 30-year-old woman. And she was in front of the court saying how incredibly broken she had realized she was. These were not crocodile tears. She was actually crying. I've been wrong. I repent. I'm sorry. She's using Christian language. And she was saying, I've been wrong, and I'm learning my lesson, and I'm really sorry. And it was beautiful. I was watching this woman publicly be humble, which is something we never see anymore.
Right.
We don't see that. So that night I went home and made another stupid decision. I got on social media and I watched for the better part of an hour as pretty much everybody on the other side of her politically just trashed her,
Mm.
tarred and feathered her, like shamed her, canceled her, whatever language you want to use. And it dawned on me as I was sitting there grieving this. We had been watching a woman humbly acknowledge her fault, and everybody's dunking on her. And the combination of those two is teaching a whole new generation that if you're humble, it's a liability. And you're going to get dunked on, and the other side's going to win. And so we've become a culture that demands repentance, but the minute somebody actually does it, we tar and feather them.
Yeah,
and and
absolutely.
and it's absolutely killing our civic discourse because nobody now is allowed to be humble as a learner. It's a liability. It's killing us. And at the end, I worry. I don't want to sound apocalyptic here, but as a nation, I don't know if there's a good end to that. I don't know. I don't know if we get out of that without some form of bloodshed as a nation, um, unfortunately. So
Yeah.
I think that this issue is not just a cute idea of we need Christians who are humble, who are teachable. I think this is the issue of a nation. Can can we be learners again? Or are we just going to belittle people that are humble learners who recognize that maybe they've been wrong about something, for heaven's sake?
Yeah, and I also think that same issue begins to pervade the church too. The
Oh,
church has
oh,
become so politicized, but
mm,
the church has become politicized not only on political issues, but on doctrinal issues in such a way that you we can't talk with one another. We can't talk with our brothers and sisters
yep. Mm,
about things that matter because we'll get eaten alive,
yes, that's right.
and we can't talk socially about it. So I think that's an issue. And then, when I think about pastors, I think, well, they are forced to put force fields around themselves and around their own brokenness, because if they let the cat out of the bag that they're struggling with something, well, they'll get eaten alive. And
Yeah.
it is so far from the gospel and from what
Mm,
Jesus was about. So,
mm,
and that's why I think this book, and I think which it seems like it's a natural outflow of your other books too,
Yeah. Yeah.
is so important.
Yeah, that's an insightful comment. I've actually never heard anybody draw the line between all my stuff around humility, but there's a lot of truth to that. I do think part of the reason why that's the case for me is I've lived most of my adult life in a city that has, three big universities in it. I'm constantly surrounded by really smart people in different fields. Like my office, my university office literally is right across the street from the University of Oregon here, one of the major research institutions in the world. And it is not uncommon for me to spend time with people, with PhDs in, these random areas of scholarship who are like complete nerds. And what I've learned in this city is how many of those people love Jesus and are deeply committed Christians. I think we've got to embrace. I think we need to, in a way, I think we need to do some work to undo the idea that to be a person of deep faith, particularly in this instance, to be a deep person of Christian faith or love the Bible or be committed to the Bible, that is somehow the enemy of being a deep learner,
Mm,
right? I mean, he frames the entire, he's asked, what's the greatest commandment? He says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. Love your neighbors yourself. And Jesus, in one of the Gospels, the word mind is included in that.
yeah,
Use that to love God with the whole mind, even on a neuroscientific level, the synapses in our brain that connect different parts of the substructure of our brain. We're learning. The brilliant Christian neuroscientist by the name of Kurt Thompson, whose work maybe you've heard of. But yeah, Kurt talks about the effects of shame on the brain. It actually turns out that shame and trauma that go unexplored and touched and healed actually shrink parts of the brain. So to love God with your mind, Tommy, not just how you think, but the physical mind, to love God with the brain, the mind, is a whole body existence story. It's yes, learning how to learn. It's also, um, doing the work of getting the stories of shame and trauma out of your life so that your brain can heal. I mean, so to love God with your mind, it's at the heart of Christian identity. Um, as the former pastor of the congregation that I go to, Roy Hicks Jr. used to say, um, we should never expect people to put their brains in a doggy bag when they enter the sanctuary.
yeah.
We should come to worship God with our whole being.
Yeah, absolutely. And uh, that's the way it should be, but it's not in the mainstream. It's like the currents are going the
Hmm.
opposite direction of that. Um, as I understand it in your book, you talk about, and I'd love to just do a little bit of a deep dive into this. You talk about the discipline of teachability,
Hmm.
or at least it's kind of in the description on Amazon. I'd love to. We don't typically associate those two words
Hmm.
together.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
And when I think about that discipline of teachability, I think about it from the perspective, okay, if I can, in essence, put on a lens by which I begin to see the world through that lens of what can I learn,
Yeah.
uh, that can be a game changer. And you
Yeah.
talk about the, two categories of strangers and enemies, which is great. Uh, I also think about how do we learn from our family? Because our
Hmm.
family is one of the places we also have a lot of guards up against. But what is it? Do you see teachability as a discipline? And if so, how do we grow that?
Yeah, I mean, a discipline in the Christian tradition, a discipline is something that you do in an effort to arouse spiritual growth, right? A discipline would be developing a prayer life, practicing a day of rest, Sabbath, being generous. It's the weekly, monthly practice of giving money to those in need, fasting. These are disciplines that cultivate character. They cultivate virtue in hope of cultivating Christlikeness. That's kind of the goal of a discipline. In a way, um, becoming a teachable person is not something that happens overnight. I don't think that the normal unredeemed person is very good at being teachable. It is something that we have to learn. There was a John Calvin who was a reformer in the 400 500 years ago. John Calvin had this sermon he preached on Deuteronomy chapter 10. Is one of his most read sermons he ever preached on that story in Deuteronomy 10 when God tells Moses to come up the mountain, Mount Sinai, to receive the Ten Commandments. But God tells Moses to come up the mountain with two um, tablets that were unmarked, so that God Himself could write the Ten Commandments. And John Calvin loved this was one of his famous favorite images in the Bible. That it is our task to bring to God a heart and a mind upon which God could write.
Ooh, I love that.
And guess what John Calvin called that? He called it a teachable spirit, which is actually why I've titled the book A Teachable Spirit, is because Calvin believed for anybody to experience God the way that God wants them to experience it, there's a part that we play.
Yeah.
It doesn't come out of nowhere. It doesn't just come out of the ether. Like, you've got to cultivate a view of God that makes room for God to write on the tablets of your mind and your heart. And I think that's if you ask about the discipline of teachability, we've got to be cultivated as the kinds of people who bring tablets up to God, who bring tablets into the world to be able to have them written on, to bring tablets into relationship that somebody can write. I think one of the reasons we don't like being taught is because we're afraid that we're going to lose our power.
Yeah.
We're afraid that we'll be embarrassed or we'll be shamed or we'll be, whatever it is. And so we choose not to be teachable because we don't want to be embarrassed. Well, God's not going to embarrass you. And he's not going to teach you in order to shame you. A good teacher never uses shame to teach.
Yeah.
Um, and so we can trust cultivating this teachability. I think every single day we should all have something every single day that we can say out loud. Our lives are not complete in yet. Today I can say, Tommy, I am not a very patient person.
Hmm.
I can declare that. And I know that because I'm waiting for a big decision in my life. And I'm really, really impatient for that thing to be decided. It's cathartic to be able to say out loud, I am not a very patient person, because it's almost like I'm bringing the tablets up to God and I'm saying, God, I need you
Hmm.
to write on this. To be teachable people, we have to be broken, to have needs. So I would say, start every day with a confession of brokenness.
Hmm.
I am not where I should be yet. I am not the graceful person I want to be. I have not gotten over that addiction. I am, you name it. And just naming that, it's almost like you're starting your day by bringing the tablets up to God.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the powerful places that journaling can come in, as
Yes. Yeah, 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 yeah.
more in a morning time, if you can begin to confess, and confess can be confessing something powerful in your life as well as something bad.
Yep.
You are naming the truth
Yep.
uh, that you're existing in. And sometimes, unless we put words down on paper, then these things just swirl around in our mind and they don't
No.
they don't take root. And I think what you're saying is you allow it to take root, and then that places you in a posture of
Yep.
learnability.
Yep.
Yeah, that's great. Um, there's so much we could talk about, but I'd love to just pick one thing out. Your favorite thing of from how do we learn from strangers or how do we learn from enemies?
Ah, let's do the enemies one, if that's
Okay.
okay. Yeah,
Right.
yeah, let's do the enemies one. And actually, I had a friend who endorsed the book, who's a very kind of famous theologian, and he wrote back and he said, "I'm going to write an endorsement, but I'm really uncomfortable with you saying that we should learn from our enemies." And we had a really good dialogue about it. He was rightfully questioning, is that something we should do? Is that something that we should actually attempt to do? And I argue we should, and I'll explain why. Um, in one of my classes that I teach, it's called Intro to the Bible. This is for students who have really never read the Bible. They're brand new to the Christian faith, or they came to university, they've never studied the Bible on their own. And I do a lecture in that class on why people burn books. There's in the history of the world, the idea of burning books, which is that you burn the writings of your perceived enemies. And I asked the students to tell me, and I put up on the screen a picture of Adolf Hitler's book Mein Kampf, which is his anti-Semitic rant he wrote from prison that would eventually become kind of the ideological backbone for much of his much of the Holocaust. And I asked the students, should we read Mein Kampf or should we burn it? And most of my students, many of them would say we should burn it. We shouldn't read it. It's not something we should read. We should burn it. And I make the case, actually, that one of the things we need to do, and I'm not trying to get Mein Kampf sales to rise here, to be very clear, but I argue that the only way to defeat the bad ideas of your enemy is you actually have to know them.
Mm-hmm.
You can't defeat something you don't know. And that if you burn Mein Kampf, then all you're doing is giving more power to those ideas, because you're not immune to them. You haven't developed the defense system that your mind needs. The mind is a lot like our body. It needs it needs an immune system. And the only way to grow your immune system is you got to challenge the immune system.
Yeah.
And so I tell my students, actually, you know what? I think you need to read Mein Kampf. Not anytime soon, and I don't want you to buy it because I don't want you to give any money to the ideas, but you need to know the ideas, because it is only by knowing the ideas of your enemies that you're able to defeat them. And I do this little interesting thing on the early church fathers in the history of the church. In the early church, many of the early church fathers would write these epistles, these letters against what they called the heretics, the people whose ideas were very dangerous, and against the orthodox view of Jesus. And I point out the fact that they're quoting the heretics means they read them.
Yeah.
They knew them, and they were willing to hear what they had to say, not because they wanted to change their views to fit them, but because that's the way you challenge people. I would actually say that one of the greatest ways that you change people's minds is by being willing to hear what they have to say.
Yeah.
And here's the guy, Daryl Davis. If anybody goes and watches this video, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. It's probably the most watched TED Talk video in all of TED Talk history. But there's a story of a man named Daryl Davis, African-American man, who decided to do the craziest thing. He started to befriend members of the KKK. And at the end of his video, he shows this wardrobe of all these KKK robes of men who, because he befriended them, they eventually left their views behind, because he was willing to be in relationship with them. Tommy, I think there's a missional component to listening to our enemies. It doesn't mean we agree with them. And learning from somebody doesn't mean you believe what you've learned. You can learn something and not believe it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Well,
learning something is not the same as receiving it into your life. It's the same. It's you just listening and being attentive. And I think by doing that, we actually end up changing human hearts.
sure. And at some level, how in the world can we love our enemies if we never listen to them?
Yes, that's right.
I
That's
mean,
right.
we are called to do that, as crazy as it is.
Yeah.
And to sit there and say, well, somehow I can divorce and I will have love for my enemy that I
Yeah.
completely shut off and I'm not even willing to listen to.
Yes. Yes.
That doesn't even make
Yep.
logical sense.
Yep.
But
To love, it's funny that we're told to pray for our enemies and love our enemies, right? This is classic Jesus stuff. Love your enemies, pray for your enemies. That says two things to me. It says, number one, to love your enemies actually means to be in relationship with them. You can't love somebody you're not in a relationship with. So that goes, I mean, Tommy, that goes against everything our culture is saying right now about the other, people that think differently. Is it you cancel them, you shut them out, you don't listen to them. The way of Jesus is so much more compelling than the baloney our culture is coming up with these days
Yeah.
on both sides of the political spectrum. The way of Jesus says, love your enemies, which means you have a relationship with them. And then second, and I'm not saying, by the way, somebody that's abused you or physically harmed you that you need to be in a relationship. I'm not talking about that kind of enemy. That's a different category. And secondly, pray for your enemies, which means you think about them. They're on your mind. You say their name when you pray to God. They're brought up in your mind. I think there's psychological healing in. I think canceling people makes people dumb
Yeah.
because it in the end it just creates a world where you're the center of your universe and there's nobody that's different than you. Listen, there are 8 billion people on this planet and everybody thinks they're the center of the universe. You tell me how it's working out.
Yeah.
It's not
Exactly.
working out very well.
Canceling people is burning books that are people.
It's ideological book burning. That's exactly right. Except we're burning. Yeah, yeah, that's
Yeah.
right.
Well, I absolutely can't wait to read this, not just because we're doing this podcast together, but I think there is a really important message in this. And I look forward to reading this. My guess is that there are 100 different applications for this
Yes.
in
Yeah.
terms of their life. Um, so I would encourage people to go to it. How can people connect with
Mm.
you? With your Substack is absolutely phenomenal. I love it.
Oh, it's generous of you.
Reading it. So, how do people connect with you?
I'd start. Yeah, I hate. I'm so bad at social media. It's laughable. I'd say my Substack is really the way to get my ideas the most. I pretty much communicate all my stuff through that. So the low level theologian, you can find it. It's all over. So the low level theologian. Come for the ride. And Tommy, it's an honor to get to not only talk to you, but to get to have your listeners potentially engage my stuff. So thank you for creating space for this.
Well, great. Thank you so much, AJ. And I hope if time allows and life allows that we'll be able to stay connected.
Yeah, same to you. Grace and peace, friend.
Thanks. Thanks everybody for listening to this episode of Space for Life. We'll be back next week and blessings to you.